Hey friends, this is the Help and Hope podcast, and I'm Sharon Betters, and I am co-hosting today with my husband Chuck. And the purpose of this podcast is to offer help and hope, especially to hurting people. And we go into some of the most broken places that people can experience. And so today, we are so eager to introduce to you our guest, Gary Episcopo, who has a dramatic story of redemption, of finding Jesus, experiencing Jesus, meeting Jesus, and then taking the message of Jesus into the lives of others whose lives he knows well. And we're going to ask him to share that story with us today. So go get your glass of iced tea or a cup of coffee, or if you're driving, keep your hands on the wheel and come along with us and listen into our conversation with Gary.
Gary, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was from a Little Italy area, born and raised up there, and Italian descent, and became a Christian. Even though I heard all that growing up, I never had a real relationship with Jesus. And in June of 1989, I was working on a masonry job. I was labor, and there was an evangelist that worked that job. And he had been speaking to me for years, but this one day I had just gotten married, and I had my first thought from the Holy Spirit. I said to this evangelist, his name is Greg LaFasia, which is an outstanding evangelist. He was, continued to share Christ with all of us. And then one day I just said, hey, I don't think you can be married today without the Lord. And he said, would you like to accept the Lord? And so I always tell people, I didn't get the red carpet. I didn't get the, here's a free Bible, let's go out to lunch. I was on a job site. I knelt in the rocks. He prayed over me. As soon as I got up, I had to mix a double batch of stucco. So right away I said, this is probably going to be a little bit like my story, because like I said, I see people receive at the altar and with kneeling on carpet, and like I said, get gifts and presents and clapping. I got none of that. I got, okay, you receive Jesus, now it's time to make seamen. So that's how I started. And that was in 1989, June of 1989. And so I just started my journey on learning how to be married, and the Holy Spirit entered me, and the rest is going to be unveiled as we go.
Yes.
Well, Gary, you share your story so beautifully, and you have a ministry that flowed out of mixing that concrete. and immediately, as soon as you were called, God had a plan for you to take the hope that you had experienced to your friends. And you have a biker ministry now. Tell us about that. Tell us how that happened.
Well, in 2006, the Lord put a unquenchable fire inside of me to go to the bikers with the love and compassion that he had shown me. And I was associate pastor at a church at that time, and I had been with the church about 7 years. And so I was very excited, and I went to the leaders, and I understand that it just wasn't their cup of tea. So, they basically said, this is not what we're looking for here. So, God had already made the decision. And broken and rejected, I left with no plan and no money. And I was riding an old shovelhead at the time, which is an old Harley. And that would belong to my friend that was killed in a motorcycle accident in 2004. And right away, the purchase of that bike, well, I had no money, and I really wanted the bike. And it was made possible by an outlaw motorcycle club that financed it for me. So God was already in work, because I would have to go to their clubhouse/bar and make my payments every Friday. And then Sunday, I was at the pulpit. So it was a little bit comical, really. But that's where God was already working, because, it was financed by an outlaw motorcycle club who thought, yeah, we'd like to see you have that bike also. So where the church rejected me and broke me, and I think there's a lot of us out there that have been hurt and rejected by the church. And these guys, they accepted and they loved on me, and God was in the midst. And I was riding around aimlessly and feeling the bandit, and I noticed a truck had been following me for several blocks. And after a few turns, I caught a light, and the truck pulled up next to me, and was yet another member of an outlaw motorcycle club. And he asked me what was going on in my life, and I told him. exactly what I just told you guys. And what he said next sent chills. I had goosebumps all over my body. I could barely ride home. Because after listening to my story, he looked at me and he said, and this is a member of an outlaw motorcycle club, a high-ranking officer, and he said to me, "You'll do more on those two wheels you would have ever done at that church." And I knew God had just spoke to me. You just know. Like I said, the goosebumps. I was like, boy, that's amazing that God, used this man to speak these words into my life, and I knew what was ahead of me. Somewhat. I joined what we call the Christian Motorcycle Association that year, and my wife and I were very effective in the motorcycle world. The Christian Motorcycle Association is huge. It's probably 150,000 members, and they're nationwide and international. They're all over. But I became a member, and my wife and I, like I said, we started reaching many, restoring marriages, hospital visits, weddings, funerals, accompanied by prayer. And now it's 2015, and we met with a couple that rode, and they heard of our ministry, and so we went out to dinner with them. This is the night of the accident. So they told us that we need to be prayed up because of, how many people we were reaching and touching, and the difference, just a whole different ministry than any that I had come across, because we received grace right away from the 1% world, which is very closed. They're very selective about who they let near and why. But they knew I was sincere, and I continued to show that love and compassion. So now, where was I then? Okay, so I take notes because my mind is not as sharp as it used to be. But it was a Sunday evening, November 8, 2015, just a few miles from where Mark's accident was. It was rut season, which that means the deer are chasing the females, and that's how they continue on reproducing and things like that. So they're wild. They're just chasing now. So we made the turn on the Route 9, and we had groceries in the back seat, and we're talking about how we need to pray protection, how the things that woman said to us. And I said, okay. So we stopped and we prayed, and there was a deer already dead right there as we made the turn. And so we just went a little further down the road after praying protection. And this buck came right through the windshield out of a ditch. I never saw him. And kicking and just smashing, tore the car up to her, but kicked her in her head. And she immediately became blind. Still had some sort of a pulse, but not much. So I was dialing 911 and steering what was left of that car down to the Delaware City firehouse. And then when she was in the car, I saw her lift herself up to get another breath of air. And it reminded me of what Jesus did on the cross. If you remember, he had to push off to get a breath of air, and she did that exact thing, and then gave up her spirit. And 30 years was over that fast. But remember back when I said we prayed for protection, I believe that we were both protected that day. Me physically, but her differently. And I find that in Isaiah 57:1, it brought me a lot of comfort and understanding that I didn't have, that the righteous perish, and no one ponders it in his heart, that devout men are taken away, or women in this case, and no one understands the righteous are taken away to be spared from evil. So I really believe there was something coming down the road that was far worse than what we had experienced that day, because she was taken quickly. I don't believe she felt any pain. And those who walk uprightly, and they enter into a peace, and they find peace as they lie in death. So I believe she was protected one way, and I was protected another, but both protected. At the funeral, there was 1,500 people, 200 motorcycles. For some reason, they alerted the authorities, and they had helicopters following us, and they were all over the place. and really didn't get much privacy, but they were all there. Law enforcement, I guess it would say, followed us everywhere, followed us down to the cemetery. But the main thing from that day is I gave the best message I ever gave in all the years of preaching, which started in 2004, so it's been 20 years now. I said, I'm not angry at God. And I'm talking to 1,500 people. And I said, his ways are higher than ours. So did I understand? No, I didn't understand. But I really wasn't angry at God. Did I miss her? Did I question him? All that went on. But angry, I wasn't, because when we give our lives to Christ, we give our lives to Christ, and we give him the permission to do whatever he wants. It's not a tug of war. It's no longer I to live, but Christ that lives in me, in Galatians 2:20. And the life I live now, I live by faith. But, okay, God chose to take her that day and not me. And I questioned that too, because I was like, would have been. But we have a daughter who's still here with me, and we're continuing on in the ministry. But here's what was going on. After a few years of wandering in the desert, this didn't happen overnight, I was wounded and hurt and looking for some type of relief in all the wrong places. And so I was riding down 301 in 2018, now it's 3 years later, and I get hit. I'm on my bike, and I have to be helicoptered off the road. And during that time, I remembered that God had called me to the motorcycle world. And I would return to my first love, which was Jesus. During that time, a young man, also a biker, who showed up at my doorstep going through a divorce. He was young. He was like a son to me, and like a brother to my daughter, and I loved him like a son, and she loved him like a brother. And so he shows up at my door, and I say, yeah, you gotta stay here, and your daughter can come here, and you'll have your own thing. Don't worry about nothing. It's going to be okay. But I knew he had a history of incarcerations and some drug abuse, but he was on fire for the Lord and lead many. And I just was very excited for him. We would have these awesome conversations. But he relapsed, as often does, and a lot of people will be able to, they'll understand that this happens. And sure, there's people out there that have been through similar things. So he relapses, and I go to get him up for work. He's not waking up. He's not answering his bedroom door. I climb in the window. I find him gone. He was already cold and blue. And so I experienced that, which led me to, a lot of medications and psychiatrist offices, and just trying to figure everything out. But God continued to work in my life. I was survived by His grace, and now presently working in a ministry in what we call the 1% world, which, as far as I know, I'm the first one to ever be a chaplain to those guys. Because, like I said, it's a very closed off, very, you have to earn that trust. And I continue to love on them with the compassion and love that, God had showed me. And currently working in that ministry, I do, the funerals, which we lose a lot, and for motorcycle accidents and such, and lifestyles. But I'm able to move freely and all that, and wearing my Christian patch, which is, they accept me just like I am, and I get opportunities to share the gospel where most would never even be allowed on the property. I have free. I can come and go at the clubhouses and different things that I get freedom that had never been granted before. So I know God is working in this. I know it's Him that working through me. One of the verses that I wrote down for this interview was Romans 8:28, which people will quote quite often, and we know that in all things God works for good of those who love Him. But the second part of that, and a lot of times they stop there, is who have been called according to His purpose. his purpose. It was his purpose to take my wife home that day. It was his purpose to put me in the motorcycle ministry. It was his purpose that people will be reached with the gospel of Jesus Christ that would never otherwise have that opportunity that I'm aware of. So I consider really that all our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. But I prayed earnestly, God, take this pain away from me. And I'm getting emotional because we had been, like I said, together 30 years and faithfully just loved each other. And not without trials and struggles, but the Lord had brought us together. So when I prayed for God to take away that pain, he said, no. And I said, no, that still small voice when God speaks to you. He said, it's out of that pain. And I know you guys will understand that these messages are birthed. So now I'm not going to take it away. I'm going to use it for the further advance of the gospel of Jesus Christ and for his glory. So, able to comfort a lot and bring a lot of relief to others. But for me, God has chosen to not take it away, but to use it in that way. And when I said what I said about I'm not angry at God, and I know you two will completely understand this, I wasn't angry at God not because I was this incredible man of faith. Oh, you're so strong. I've heard all those things. The reality of all of it is I understood and go where? Who has the words of life? Who is going to bring me any comfort at all? I mean, it wasn't that I was this tremendous man of faith. It was like I understood that there was nowhere else to go but the foot of the cross. Where many others run from him, I ran to him and still running there to this day. And people came up to me at that funeral and said, well, if you're not going to be angry at God, then I'm not going to be angry at God. And some of them had been angry at God for their entire life, which I believe is just a deception from Satan to keep you to surrendering your life to him and, walk in his ways.
Let me ask you a double-sided question. When was the accident? When did God take
It was November 8th, 2015.
Okay. Since that time, what are some of the things that people said to you that were helpful? On the other side of that, what are some of the things that people said to you that were not helpful?
Well, almost immediately I was led to work at the funeral home part-time because I have some issues from the accident, PTSD and some other things, which I believe also a lot of people out there can relate to. But some of the things that people said was they didn't understand why I wanted to work at a funeral home, of all places. But I saw opportunities for what I had experienced. So, because I was meeting people that were widows for an hour, a day, a week. And I was able to share things that only those who are widows and lost could even know. And so God was using my story to help other people. Jamie's story, she donated her kidneys and heart, and she was an organ donor, and I have letters here from people that received those things. So even though people were, I guess they were literally concerned about me and my condition, where I knew God had called me there and to touch other people's lives. Now, that was some of the things that were said that weren't helpful. Now, the ones that was they recognized the anointing that I had with these 1% clubs. And not only the anointing, which is awesome, they also recognized the love and compassion that I have. I often say, if you haven't found something to die for, you haven't really lived. And these guys, I love them. And with all my heart. And I know that didn't come from me. That compassion and love, I couldn't even muster up. It came from God himself. And the people that were telling me, you're anointed, this is what you're called for, this is your ministry, that kept me going plenty of times when I wanted to give up, as you well know, Mr. Betters, about that. So those two things, people say, question what I chose to do with my time, and others, just reminded me that that's what I was anointed for. Now, I have suffered somewhat as far as being profiled by law enforcement. So they don't really understand what they just, record the license plates and tags and come to different things. But I have been shown nothing but love and affection from a world that most will not enter. And
there was a biker funeral that I had some years ago, and there were about 1,000 people there. They were all bikers. One of their own had been killed on his motorcycle. And I got a call at home while they were making their way into the church from my secretary, who said that the FBI was there. They wanted to set up cameras to record who was coming in and going out. And they wanted my permission. And I said, absolutely not. I said, this is a sacred moment. We will not do that. We will not tarnish this worship service with people in suspicion of these men and women coming in. But one of the things I learned from that biker funeral is there is a subculture and subcultures to subcultures inside the biker world. And most people who are not in that world are afraid of the bikers. They fear them for some reason. They look different. I mean, I noticed you got tattoos all over your arms. And you mentioned being profiled. What is the way in which you reach out to the biker world? Being A, that you were part of that world, and B, that you've experienced such great loss. How would you advise somebody who sees that the biker world is, I don't know, an atheistic world? These are bad boys. These are crooks and criminals and everything else. And that's how the outside world views them. And yet what exposure we have had to the biker world is you can't get some people that are more kind and more compassionate and more open to reaching out. So talk to that person out there right now who looks at the biker world as some sort of evil in our culture. How do you reach that mindset?
Well, at my wife's funeral, we had a member of an outlaw motorcycle club to get up and wrote me a letter. And he shared that letter with me and the 1,500 people at the funeral with his outlaw stuff on at the altar of the church. And this is what he wrote. I'm so sorry to hear about your loss. I recall your wife sitting alone at establishments down here. It has a deck on it, and we eat out there, and we used to spend time there. And at that time, I didn't know it was your wife, but she had an appearance that separated her from the others on the deck that were very noticeable. Her posture and mannerisms were classy and distinguished. After formally meeting her, she reminded me of my own mother in many ways. She spoke with confidence and conducted herself as a true lady, unlike many women today. After speaking with you both and listening to your stories from the past, it was easy to see you had been through a lot together and depended on each other to get through the hard times. I do not know of any other words that could help you through this hard time. I get emotional reading this. I apologize for that. You're currently going through. I know most people turn to religion for answers, but personally that has never offered us answers I am looking for. He was very honest about that. I wish I would have enjoyed her company more than that single day. but for some unknown reason, I will not have the privilege. In addition to offering my condolences, I want you to know the impact you had on my life. You are single-handedly the most positive person I've ever met. You see the good and in the bad and maintain hope that even the worst people can do good with their lives. I've never known you to pass judgment on anyone, nor thought any less of them for their views. I am consistently impressed by the way you put yourself between opposing people promoting the greater good. I find your giving and selfish demeanor are infectious. When I was club president, speaking with you reassured me I was making good choices for myself and other guys. You taught me that being a true tough guy sometimes meant making tough decisions and not necessarily using force to produce an outcome. I truly appreciate each time you have taken the time to speak with me. I have heard stories about your past and your youth and see how physically strong you are, but I feel your mind and heart are clearly your true strength. You have shown me that making a positive difference is really what people do. Lifting weights is something anyone can train to do. The way you lift people's spirits and push to make a difference in all people, especially those in the biker community, is extraordinary. To simply say you are a true brother and a great man, and if you are one of God's workers, then He is gleaming with pride for all you have done with your life and impacted the lives of others. I know you are hurting now, but know you are in my thoughts, and in all our lives you have made better. Please do not hesitate to call me or my family if anything you need.
Wow, that is an awesome letter. Hold on to that one.
Yes, it's in a frame. It's in a frame.
It's an awesome letter, yes. Sharon has one more question for you.
Well, first, Gary, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story, but more than that, for being the man who has had a life transformed by Jesus and whose love for Jesus compels you to take that love to others. And that's really what this man was describing. He may not have been able to articulate that personal relationship to Jesus, but that is what the scriptures talk about, is to live such a life that even those who want to find something wrong with you, they can't, because you're glorifying God. And that's what we are seeing, and we are so grateful for that ministry that so many of us don't even know is going on. And I always know there's at least one person who is listening to this podcast who is desperate for hope, just really desperate. Could be desperate because they've made bad decisions. They have a loved one who is in a very dark place and they don't understand, how they can help them. They're in deep grief. And so I want to focus on that, where the loss is great, the grief is deep. It may not be because of the loss of a loved one. A couple of practical ways that if you had 1 minute with that person, that you would encourage them, this is the way to find hope and peace. What would you say to that person?
Well, it can only be found in Jesus. But, if you're talking to people that don't personally have a relationship, if you're talking to a person that doesn't personally have a relationship with them, you just have to be that Jesus. You have to love unconditionally. You have to share what you experience, but you have to bring Jesus in a way that you're an example. Preaching to groups like that or quoting scriptures, that's not how it works. You have to demonstrate that in that world for them to realize that you do love them, that you do care for them, and that you do, that you're real, and so you're quoting scriptures and all that, and that's not how it's done. You have to be that Jesus, and maybe the only one that they'll ever meet.
There is a term that I used to use. It's called lifestyle evangelism, where you are living out your faith, not with words, but with deeds, with action, with compassion. And I look at a man like you, that every time you talk about the accidents, you have to rip off the scab of your own personal grief. I know what that's like. We know what that's like. Oftentimes when Sharon went out speaking after she published a book, she would come home bleeding because she had to rip the scabs off. talk about the loss. But the willingness to do that is where the healing is found, because that is part of the purpose for which our loved ones were taken from us, so that we might spread the glory of God. It really boils down to that, because you said it just a minute ago, that if they don't have a relationship with Jesus, you've got to show them what that relationship looks like.
Yes.
So, Gary, I want to thank you for your willingness to come on to Mark Inc. Ministries and talk to people, because you are reaching a lot of people right now. We're going to hear this story, and they're going to want to know more. So I want to personally thank you for your willingness to rip the scab off again.
Yes. That's a very good description of what happens every time I revisit.
Yes.
So.
And I think your daughter helped you with this broadcast.
Yeah,
today.
I don't know how to work things. I'm 60-something years
Well,
old.
tell her we said thank you very much.
Yeah.
Because we don't know how to do it either.
I grew up in a time when there was one phone that was in the kitchen,
Yep.
and it had that 30-foot cord.
Right.
I'm going to ask Sharon to close us in prayer.
Okay.
Gary, thank you so much for, I echo Chuck's thanks to you for sharing your story with us. We know it's painful, but God is bringing beauty from ashes, and we're so grateful to partner in ministry with you to be able to share this with others who need the hope of Jesus that you have experienced. So I'm Sharon Betters, and my husband Chuck has been the co-host with this podcast produced by Mark Inc. Ministries, and Gary Episcopo has been our guest today. And we know that his story is touching hearts beyond what he could imagine, and we know that your heart has been touched, and we hope that you will share his story with others and let us know how God is using his story and the stories that we have on our website at markinc.org to help turn your heart toward Jesus. You go to markinc.org, well, you'll find over 200 stories like Gary's, growing every week. We share new ones every week, so subscribe so that you don't miss just one of them. You'll hear them all. So again, that's markinc.org, and you can reach us through our website at markinc.org. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to being with you again.